Sit here and welcome to the Drunken Ork. Now, one of my favourite models to paint out of the relatively recent GW range has been the Beastboss on Squigasaur. I think it's a fantastic model. I built him as Mozrog, although I've done a few changes. I kept the big chopper and stuck a few other odds and sods on it just to, make it a little bit different. But he's been absolutely fantastic. And I love the idea of a lone character galloping around the battlefield, just wreaking carnage. Now in 10th edition, you can actually run a few of these. Back in 9th, you were kind of limited to just the one, because it was a Warlord model. Maybe you could take two, I think, with some detachment trickery. But that's by the by. That's in the past. In 10th, you can actually have up to 3 of these, plus Mozrog. So I intend on running him as Mozrog, and I was going to build some more Beastboss on Squigasaurs. So I got these lads, these little mangler squigglies. I got them from Element Games, actually at the shop, which I went to as part of a Waaagh that the Pale Ork organised, which was phenomenal. Really enjoyed that. So I got these. They're a little bit smaller, but that's okay. These are just little Beastbosses, and I'm going to intend on doing the 2 riders very similar, almost like twins. But then GW went through as a curveball when they recently released the Age of Sigmar Tuskboss on Maw-Grunta. It's a fantastic looking model. I really, really like that. I'm not too keen on the fellas stood on the side. I don't mind them in themselves. Pair of good looking lads, but just not for what I had in mind. And what I had in mind was making another Beastboss on Squigasaur. Not Mozrog, and not the 2 twins I'm intend to do, future projects, it's all up there. But just another standalone fella, and I thought he would look really good sort of mixing in with some of the other Age of Sigmar 40k conversions I've done, where I've took the Savage Ork Boar Riders and the Maw-Gruntas and the just Savage Orks and whatnot, and put them all together in a very feral themed, kind of savage Ork army. Plus, he's got a little bit of the actual Ork hard boy look about him as well. Not too much, still quite savage, but a little bit more hard boy, and that'll hopefully bridge the gap between some of the hard boy 40k conversions I've done as well, allowing us to use all the Age of Sigmar stuff together in one force. So this video is looking at the build process for turning the Tuskboss on Maw-Grunta into something to use in 40k. I hope you enjoy it. Let's look at the build. Okay, full disclosure. When I bought this model, I was very keen to get started, so I built it. Pretty much as GW dictates, i.e. following the instructions. I changed a few things with regards to the rider and left some of the armour plates off the bow itself because I didn't want to have it too armoured up, but I built it as was. And because that was basically the intent to have it like that, I wasn't exactly trigger happy with the photos. In other words, at that point, I didn't take any. So here's a few pics of the model, pretty close to how it ended up with myself, build-wise. And we want to primarily focus on the back legs. Because you see, it has 4 legs. It has 2 at the front, and it has 2 at the back. That's pretty much a standard layout as far as legs go on something like a boar or a lot of mammals, including dolphins and whales, etc. But you get the idea. Now, one night, whilst gazing lovingly at this new model in all its grey plastic glory, after a few glasses of whiskey and some flu medication, I had a fantastic idea. And with my trusty saw, some pliers, some snips, a knife and a lot of determination, I done this. I cut the back legs off it. Because what's more 40k than a CyBoar? Now this is what I woke up to the next morning, with a fuzzy recollection of what had went on. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit panicked. I knew I'd thought about doing something like that, but I'd never actually had the cojones to do it because it's such a nice model. But this was an opportunity, and when presented with one such as this, you've just got to dive in. So here we go. I took a wheel from a Lego set. I think it was off some kind of dragster because it's a big sort of flat tyre. It was the right sort of size, and I didn't want all the knobbly grips on like a lot of the big off-roading tyres do. On this side, you see I took the arm off the wrecking ball off the truck, and I gently warmed up some of the chain just so I could bend it in more and basically make the support for the drive chain. I also stuck a little piston on there which I cut off one of the Death Dread arms just to sort of bulk it out a bit, as it was looking a little bit too thin and weedy. I then found a circle template of approximately the right size. I think it was a coin actually. Blue tacked it with a bit of plastic card and then cut round it with nail clippers, because I'm all about, you know, the high-tech solutions here. And that was just so it'll stick over the top, where basically you've got the two ends of chain and the end of the arm, and that just covers that up really. I also left the Lego axle piece in the wheel and drilled through that so I could put a pin all the way through the back axle. Is it still an axle on one wheel? Stuck a 25mm base over the top just to give it a little bit more bulk. I did actually go back and sand that flat, although it was not necessary in the end. And all I've done for the rest of the housing around that circular part at the top was just to cut little strips of plastic card and just basically planked all the way around it. And that way I could trim the plastic card so it fits snug against the rest of the model. Also filled any gaps in with Vallejo plastic putty. On the other side, you can see I've used some plastic card to basically just make a box of approximately the same size as a drive chain bit and used that to house an engine block. Now the engine block has been rattling around in my bits box since about 1992. It was from a toy car I had as a child, but even back then I thought I'll use that for something, and I think over the years, 30 years ago that is, it did get used a few times, but I never threw it away and I finally found a proper use for it. So I just stuck it in at an angle. There's a couple more bits of plastic card just to act as brackets to hold it in place, and you can also see the arm on the left hand side holding the wheel is actually an arm off a Def Dread, just trimmed down to the right sort of size and shape. I think this is the arm I actually took one of the pistons off for the other side. And you can see I've boxed in the back a bit more, and around the planking on the right hand side, two thin strips of 1/2mm plastic card wrapped around the pen just to give them a bit of curve, the spring back, but they retain some of that curve, and then just glued over there just to add a little bit of support to it. There's a little bit of plastic rod in a 90-degree triangle shape there running across the left hand side, the top of the left hand side as well. I'm basically just adding odds and ends to bulk it out a bit. I wanted some exhaust pipes and what have you on the boar, so I took a triple set of exhausts off the Wasbon blaster jet and attached those to another bit of plastic tubing. Now that plastic tubing there, the white piece, has a bit of garden wire or modelling wire, I'm not sure. It's probably garden wire, it's cheaper, I'll tell you that much, inside it. It just means you can slide a bit of wire inside the plastic tubing, then if you warm it over a flame, you can bend it without the tube creasing or deforming in any way. The wire gives it that structural integrity. Then there's a slightly larger piece of plastic tubing, and I just cut 2 rings off it, snipped one side just so the fit round, clipped into place. Drilled that into the exhaust pipes and stuck it on. A few more pieces added here. The vertical exhaust with the little pipe coming out the top, like you can see at the front, is off a 1980s Rhino. There was 4 of those exhausts all around it, and I've used them on a lot of things. I had a few of them knocking around from back in the day. The piece at the bottom with the circular section and the little bit of corrugated pipe, I believe is the back of a spotlight for Space Marine vehicle, and the blue barrel comes off a piece of Techno Gear stuff I got from Russia. Then attached the undercarriage of a killer can, which isn't as ropey as it sounds, just below the engine, and where those pipes end at the top I attached them to more plastic tubing which just feeds into the body of the boar itself. You can also see an exhaust on top with a pin in it. That is off an Imperial vehicle. I think it was the Taurox, although I may be wrong. And that was attached. I was just going to put a more Orky exhaust end off that, probably off a Killer Can or Def Dread, just to sort of round it off. There it is from the back again. A few extra little bits of detail put on, bit of plastic tubing, glyph plate, some rivets, and the obligatory Battle Wagon armour plate. That's a Battle Wagon from Rogue Trader sort of days. They're the plates that went round its wheels. I've only got a few of those left now, it's quite sad. But I like to stick them on models when I can. There's also a strange box just glued onto the left hand side at the back. I don't know why I done that. I didn't like it. I ended up taking it off. Now that exhaust is off the truck kit, and there's also a little bracket on the inside which just attaches it as a support onto the model. It didn't need it, but it just makes it look a little bit more, well, believable. And at that point the 25mm base has been filed down and had a little bit of putty put in the centre just to smooth it off. Although, in all honesty, I'm going to cover that up anyway. I've also stuck a little bit of armour plating with some nice jagged dags on it over where the axle is on the wheel. I told you I covered it up, and that's just a hatch cover off the Battle Wagon. but it's got a nice orky glyph on it, so I thought, yeah, that's ideal. And plus it adds a little bit more body to the model, bulked it out a little bit more width-wise. So here you can see there's a little bit of plastic tubing around the top of that Imperial exhaust before the Death Dread exhaust end goes in. There's a few rivets there just done with the plastic putty again. And down at the bottom on the wheel arm, I put a bit of a knob shoulder pad. There's a shoulder pad with like a circular saw looking thing sticking in it, not moving, just there. And I'd cut it off a shoulder pad for some reason, and it was rattling around, and I just looked at it and it just fit perfectly. And I thought, why not? Let's stick that on there as well. Now at the minute, because there's the grey plastic, there's some white plastic card, there's also blue plastic, and there's old painted pieces, as well as there's a lot of bicarb of soda, because I'll fill gaps with a medium sort of viscosity super glue, sprinkle a bit of bicarb on it, and it just sets it like rock and gives a nice texture, plus there's a little bit of bicarb left over. There's sprue goo on there, so it looks a little bit of a hodgepodge. It looks untidy, and at this point I'm generally thinking, oh, what have I done? This is a great model and I've ruined it. But you've just got to trust your instincts, keep going, and once you've got it all primed, it brings it all together. But at this stage, I was probably thinking what you're thinking now. So since the back was coming together, I started looking at the rider and the saddle. Now, because he's riding on a boar, the thing with the CyBoars back in the day, they had built-in syringes and injectors where the rider could hit plungers and give a special dose to these animals to sort of drive them into frenzies and shoot them forward. So I wanted to replicate that. So that is the NOS system off the truck. I think it's NOS. I made a little handle for it. So you can imagine he's riding along and he reaches down and he just cranks that handle forward, drives the boar mad. And next to it is a couple of injectors which were basically just a dual set of stick bomb launchers. And I cut the heads off the stick bombs and replaced them with the little electricity bits that go around the top of the custom mega cannons or custom mega blasters off the Waaagh blaster jet. They've got that kind of sort of, you know, syringy end, and they've got a bit of corrugation going on, so it looks like you could press them down. And plus you've got that little slide lever on the stick bomb launcher, so that all works well together, I feel. And of course you stick the odd glyph plate on there as well. And on the other side I fitted another injection device. This was cut off a pain boy, and actually it's a full-on syringe, and also a little hatch off the back of the battle wagon kill cannon. I don't know what I was thinking, to be fair. I think this is where you put your fuel in, like a petrol cap. Would a boar have a petrol cap? Don't know if that question's been asked before. And of course another little glyph plate as well on the saddle straps. Now you can just see in the top left hand corner one of the mounts off the Waaagh blaster jet's smasher gun. Now that was put on as a mount for the Beastboss on Squigasaur's thump gun. The thump gun was, I think it's an auto cannon off the Admech Archaeopter. I cut it might have been a last cannon, I'm not 100% certain. I cut the barrel off anyway and drilled it out so it looked suitably thump gunnish with a nice big bore on it. Nice big bore on it. It's on a nice big bore as well. Also added a telescopic sight from the boys kit, because that's always nice. And the back end with the handle is actually a Rogue Trader era Ork bolter with original handle, just chopped down just so it's got something for him to fire. He's not holding it, it's just sitting there in place ready to be used. Now here you can see the rider. It is pretty much just pieces from the box. I went with the big skull helmet because it looks like the Kurgan from Highlander. And how cool is that? So you've got to go with that. Makes him more feral, otherwise he is just quite armoured up. I also left his shoulder pads off because, you know, he's been at the gym, he looks after himself. Sun zoot, gun zoot, you know what I mean? Plus it looks a little bit more savage. Now with regards to the arms, I did want him to have his big chopper in his hand. Actually, sorry, no, I'll rephrase that. I did want him to have his big chopper in his hand. Nope, there's just no way to get around that. So I wanted that in his left hand, but I liked the idea of him controlling the boar with those chain reins. Now the chain reins normally attach to the boar's ears, which makes a lot of sense. However, if he's only going to have one in his right hand, it didn't make any sense to us to have it attached to his right ear, because he would only ever be able to turn right. So I attached it, I cut it and bent it slightly and attached it more centrally, and covered it just with a little shoulder pad with a glyph on. Now I don't know how effective that is to steer. You'll probably have to steer with his knees. Like that's going to make any difference at all. And that's just another shot of him from the other side. You can see on the base there's a bit of plastic card under the wheel. That was just because at this point I realised the wheel was a couple of mil, literally 2 millimeters higher up than the front foot that connects to the base. So a bit of 2mm plastic card, cut for the back of the base, filed and sanded and trimmed down around the edges so it doesn't stand up like a step. That solved that problem. You might be able to see a slight shine on the back wheel here, and that's just because I give it a coat of Mod Podge, just to try and give it a little bit more rigidity so it wasn't as, well, like a squashy Lego wheel. Ultimately, I don't think it was necessary. And that's a shot from the front. Pretty much done. All I did next was give it a prime with High Coat Matte Black Primer. I always get great coverage with it and fantastic results. Once it was primed, I dry brushed it with a medium grey from Vallejo, followed by a lighter grey, I think it was Stonewall by Army Painter, and then hit it up with some white afterwards. So it looked like this. You might also note as well that some of it's blue. That wasn't down to the greys and whites I dry brushed with, that was blue. I just painted the fur on the boar up with High Load Blue from the Army Painter Speed Paint range. Now here I painted up the orc, or at least his skin. I painted all his skin and the bone on him with Pallid Bone, again from the Army Painter Speed Paint range. Once that was dry, I dry brushed the bone bits with Vallejo's Elfic Flesh. Just gives a nice sort of dusty bone look, and if I got some on the skin, that's alright, it was just free highlights. Then to do the skin itself, it was Citadel's Mantis Warriors Green with a Bealtan wash. You see I've done the same thing with the boar's hooves and tusks. I also painted the inside of his mouth green, and the metal I just painted metallic. It was gunmetal silver. Then after that I gave the whole model a satin varnish. I used satin instead of gloss because I had satin, not gloss. And once the protective varnish was down, I was able to give it an oil wash. Just mixed up a darkish brown colour, thinned it down quite a bit and slopped it all over the metallics. Let that cure for about 30 minutes or so, and then go to wiping it off. Wipe it off just with a cloth, not a tissue, a cloth, and after that I'll use a cotton bud or Q-tip to give it a proper polish. If you find there's parts of it you're having trouble getting off, cleaning off, it's maybe over cured a little, you can always just dip your cotton bud in a little bit of odorless spirits I use, and it just makes it a little bit easier to shift it. And there's the metallics once they've been cleaned up. Still looking pretty grubby, but not like it's just crawled out of a sewer. It has also got a bit of a shine on it at the moment, the model, especially the bits which I haven't done the metallics on, namely the fur and what have you. Not so much the tusks, because they've been dry brushed since, but I will be going over it at the end with a matte varnish to take that sheen off. At this point I've just been going around picking out the reds on the dags and what have you, a couple of the glyph plates, and a little splash of colour elsewhere with yellows and blues and greens. I also painted the slaver coming out of its mouth just with a white, and then give it a wash of a very diluted bright blue. It really is just a case of filling in the gaps here. I use a lot of washes and contrast, speed paints, etc. to paint the metallics, because once you've got that metallic down, if you give it a wash with a different brown, give it a coat of a brown speed paint, it does give you a different metallic look. You can get your coppers and your bronzes quite easily doing that, so I think that's quite a nice thing to do. I also picked out all the leather straps as well, and then edge highlighted those just to make them stand out a bit. I also stuck some cables coming out from under one of the armour plates going into its face. There's a bundle of yellow cables there at the front. They were added quite late on a whim. You know what I mean? Oh, flighty. But they seem to fit the theme. Which left us with the Beastboss to do. Now at the minute, his skin's done, his wrist straps and what have you are done, and his big skull head's done. I've even painted his tongue. But all his armour is still not painted. Now a lot of my orcs follow the same sort of colour theme. I suppose you could call it goths, because there's a lot of black, but there's also a lot of red. And there's always a little bit of blue as well, so I kind of mix it up. It's not really any clan in particular, although I do tend to theme them around the goth aesthetic a little bit more. So sticking with that look, that's what I did. Picked out his big back plate in red, as well as his wrist guards, and these thigh guards. For the chest, shins and boots are mostly black. Now for the red, I used a Flesh Tearers contrast because it's a slightly deeper red, and then highlighted it with Evil Suns. And for the black, I actually used Graveyard Grey from Army Painter, because the black contrast paints are just a little bit too black for me. They're a little bit too dark. I find the grey keeps some of the highlights, and if you do want it a bit darker, you can always give it a second coat. I've also got into the habit of keeping these Age of Sigmar swords black as well, or at least grey, and then just highlighting the actual sharpened bit, the edges, with the metallic. And of course you've got to have some bright blue on there, so any little dags on his wrist guards and armour and sword and what have you were all picked out in Vallejo blue green. Now because he's got some big old armour plates on there, I thought I need to put something on them. So this one on the right, I used some masking tape to mask off a section and cut some little squares out of a thinner piece and made a stencil for some checks. Now it does take a long time to put this together, but the good thing is once you've got the tape on, you just get an old brush and just basically stipple on your white, and you can go as heavy or as light as you want depending on how saturated you want the white to be. I generally just go hell for leather, but try to keep it a little uneven, although I want the edges generally quite filled, just so it actually defines the edges of the checks. Otherwise they'll just look like splodges, and you might as well just do it with a brush in the first place. The best thing about it, to be fair though, is once you've given it a few minutes for the paint to dry, you get to peel the tape off, and you get something that looks like that. I didn't want the whole panel checked, just a band of checks running down across it. What I'll also do, I'll get some Null Oil then. The new Null Oil from GW, which is not much use at all really for most things, but it's quite good for highlighting white or low lighting white. And I'll just paint a little bit on, just a little splodge really, in the bottom right hand corner of each check, leaving the top and left hand lines bright white, and it just adds a little bit of shading to it. Very subtle, but again, do it 2 or 3 times, or use old Null Oil if you want it darker. I stuck a couple of transfers underneath it as well, because I quite like those transfers, the black and red ones. Always make sure when you cut your transfers out, you cut them as close to the actual transfer as you can, and try not to leave any of the clear film around the outside, because that will sort of attract the eye as a shiny border around your marker. So try and cut that off if you can, even if it involves cutting around a skull, get as close as you can. But if you've used your microset and your microsalt, and make sure it's on there nice and solid, I always give mine a coat of matte varnish as well, just to take the sheen off them. And on the left side armour plate, I just used one of the big Goth skull transfers, stuck it on, microsol, microset, and then on a whim painted around the outside of it with some corn red, then went around on the inside of it with a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet and dribbled it down a bit like it was a sloppily painted orc glyph, which seemed to fit. And then just because one of the exhausts at the back, which I painted red, looked a little bit plain, I stuck some yellow flame transfers around it. Now they were a bit of a nuisance to get on, but got them on, and then once it was set I was able to go around it and just fill in the little gaps behind them with some yellow paint, and once it had a matte varnish it took the shine off Champion. So there you go, that's a build, and that's the model. He's a big lad, you can see that. He's not quite in focus, is he? We'll put him there. There we go. You see the camera just focuses on my face, it loves us. I went to Specsavers recently and they asked us if I'd done modelling. I mean, I'd written it on the form that I needed glasses because I did modelling, and she went, "Oh, what kind of modelling?" And I was like, "Well, little models, not modelling." I think she knew. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted again. So yeah, he's a big lad, and this is him compared to the GW Beastboss on Squigasaur. So as you can see, he's a bit bigger, but I don't think it's too ridiculous. It's certainly not modelling for advantage. It's all about the disadvantage here. I'm hoping to get a video put together out of an army which is basically made of the EOS Kitbashes I've done. More of a feral sort of theme to it. I've no idea how many points I've done or how many points I've got still in the pipeline for this, but when I get the idea, I'll aim to get around 1,000, I think maybe 1,500, and I'll put it all together and show yous. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to end with a bit of a montage, just so you can have a proper look at the model. A few glamour shots, you know the crack. So don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Give the bell a little tickle, just so you don't miss out. And until next time, take care.